Dive deep, listen close, stay haunted. Unmarked 13.
December 6th, 1991. A seemingly ordinary Friday night closing at an Austin yogurt shop. But beneath the quiet exterior, a scene of unimaginable horror was about to unfold. Shortly before midnight, an Austin police patrolman noticed a fire coming from the "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop. Firefighters responded quickly, extinguishing the blaze. But what they discovered inside would forever haunt the city of Austin and launch a decades-long search for an unknown perpetrator responsible for a quadruple homicide. The bodies of 4 teenage girls were found amongst the ashes, bound, gagged, shot execution style in the head, and the shop set on fire. It was, as one reporter described, pure, unadulterated evil. This is the story of the Austin yogurt shop killings. The victims were 4 young women, all with lives full of promise brutally cut short. 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison were employees at the yogurt shop, working the closing shift that night. They were getting ready to head home. Joining them were Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and Sarah's friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. Sarah and Amy were visiting, planning to get a ride home with Jennifer after the shop closed. They were supposed to go to a slumber party later that night. The loss devastated their families. The Harbison family lost their only children, daughters Jennifer, a hard-working high school senior, and Sarah, who enjoyed sports and clubs as a high school freshman. Their mother spoke in 1992, saying her life was focused around them, and someone took eternity away from me. Amy Ayers, the youngest victim, was described as a country girl with a love for animals. Her father remembers her as a daddy's girl and dreamed of seeing her graduate and become a veterinarian. Sonora Thomas was just 13 when her only sibling, Eliza, was murdered. She looked up to her sister. For days, she fantasized that her sister had somehow escaped and would come back, clinging to that hope. Eliza was an animal lover and had a pig she planned to enter in a livestock show. Sonora took over those duties after her death, but coping was difficult. Sonora's life took a downward spiral in high school, marked by drugs, alcohol, hospitalization, and attending a boarding school. She felt she had to grow up quickly. Her family never talked about Eliza after she died, finding it too painful. Sonora later became a therapist, drawing on her experience to help others. She continues to remember Eliza, such as having a flower and an empty chair at her wedding ceremony. Eliza's mother, Maria Thomas, passed away in 2015, still grappling with unresolved questions about her daughter's murder. The grief and unanswered questions remain a continuing torture. Investigators pieced together what happened that night. The shop was set to close at 11 p.m. Jennifer locked the front door just before closing to prevent more customers from entering. A couple who left just before 11 p.m. reported seeing 2 men sitting at a table, acting furtively. These 2 men were described by other patrons as out of place. Around the same time, a man who had tried to hustle customers in his queue was allowed to use the back toilet, taking a very long time, and may have jammed a rear door open. The perpetrator probably exited out through a back door that was found unlocked. Police believe someone entered the yogurt shop with the intention of committing a robbery. But the situation escalated into something far more sinister. The girls were forced into the storage room. They were ordered to undress and were bound in their own undergarments or clothing. At least one of the victims had been sexually assaulted. Each girl was shot in the head. Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer were shot in the back of the head execution style with a .22 caliber lead bullet. Their bodies were severely charred. Amy's body was found in a separate part of the shop. She was not charred, but had received severe burns. She had a sock-like cloth around her neck. Amy was shot the same way, but one bullet missed her brain. A second bullet caused severe brain damage and exited through her cheek and jawline. Gunshot wounds indicated that two different types of guns were used, a .22 and a .380 pistol. Investigators believe at least 2 men were involved. After the killings, the perpetrators ignited a fire using material soaked in lighter fluid. The shop was torched with the teens inside. This act of arson was likely an attempt to destroy evidence. The fire burned so hot, it even melted parts of an aluminum ladder. The fire and the water, used to extinguish it, complicated the early investigation, destroying countless clues and making fingerprinting difficult. One of the original detectives noted that the organized method of operation, the ability to control the victims, and the destruction of evidence pointed to an adult experienced in crime, rather than teenagers. The perpetrators fled, leaving behind a scene indelibly burned into the minds of the first responders. The Austin Police Department immediately launched an investigation, forming a task force solely dedicated to solving the crime. Government agencies, including the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, were called in to assist. John Jones became the lead investigator, a role he would be forever associated with. They faced a daunting task, pursuing hundreds of leads and looking at everyone from family members to drifters. Early on, they considered various persons of interest. Serial killer Kenneth McDuff, known to be in the area and with a history involving teenagers, was soon ruled out. Over 50 people even confessed to the murders, including McDuff, on the day of his execution. But police determined these confessions were false. 8 days after the murders, a significant lead emerged. A 15-year-old named Morris Pierce was arrested at a mall near the yogurt shop, carrying a .22 caliber gun, one of the types used in the murders. While the .22s were unmatchable, meaning it couldn't be proven was the murder weapon, it was the same type. Pierce gave a statement implicating 3 other boys he knew: Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. Pierce claimed he was driving a getaway car. The boys were all teenagers at the time, none older than 17. Investigators brought in Wellborn, Scott, and Springsteen for questioning. But Pierce's story began to fall apart, cratering when investigators wired him to talk to Forrest Wellborn. And it became obvious Wellborn didn't know what Pierce was talking about. Wellborn, Scott, and Springsteen also denied any involvement. At that time, there was not enough evidence to charge them, and the 4 teens were released. Jones felt confident they got as far with them as they could then. The investigation pursued numerous other avenues, many of which proved to be red herrings. The task force became aware of a counterculture group known to be into the supernatural, sometimes visiting graveyards. Tips suggested they were talking about murders, even the yogurt shop murders. One woman's name kept coming up. Police planned a raid on her home, hoping to find evidence. While the scene inside was described as creepy, investigators found mostly rat bones and theatrical parts, They concluded the group was simply living a make-believe life. The raid was a bust. Another lead involved a sketch. Witnesses who saw the two men acting furtively outside the shop before closing helped create a composite sketch. It turned out this sketch bore a striking resemblance to one of 3 men wanted in connection with a kidnapping and sexual assault case that happened just 3 weeks prior in Austin. A tip came in that these men had fled to Mexico. 2 were caught and arrested in Mexico. 1 resembled the man in the sketch. The Mexican government announced they had confessed to the yogurt shop murders and would be tried there. This development made national news. John Jones and his team went to Mexico to interview the men. However, Jones learned that their confessions contained details that didn't match the crime scene, even getting the caliber of the guns wrong. There were too many inconsistencies. Jones's team re-interviewed the men, and this time they recanted just about everything. Jones and other investigators wondered if these confessions had been coerced by the Mexican authorities. This promising lead fell apart. Despite these dead ends, investigators continued their painstaking search for answers. But after nearly 3 years of leading the investigation, John Jones was moved out of the homicide division. He says it was a mutual decision, as Austin police wanted fresh eyes on the case. Other detectives took over, and as time passed, the victims' families were left wondering why no one had been arrested. The case seemed stalled. The case took an unexpected turn in 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders. Austin police announced the arrest of 4 men in connection with the yogurt shop killings. They were familiar names: Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. The same young men questioned just days after the murders and released. Police were convinced they had let the murderers slip through their fingers initially. There was no new physical evidence tying the men to the crime scene. What police did have were newly obtained confessions from Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. After intense questioning over 4 days, Scott confessed, describing casing the shop and returning with 2 guns. He mentioned hearing guns go off. Springsteen later confessed, going further to say he shot 1 girl and sexually assaulted her. These confessions would become the sole evidence against Scott and Springsteen. Both men later recanted, claiming their confessions were coerced. Springsteen stated he was braided and berated by police until they got what they wanted to hear, feeling they wouldn't allow him to leave. Scott's lawyer also expressed serious concerns about the validity of Scott's confession. Despite pressure from police, Wellborn always maintained his innocence. The case against the men began crumbling. Charges against Forrest Wellborn were dismissed after grand juries failed to indict him. Charges were also dropped against Maurice Pierce for lack of evidence. Only the cases against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen moved forward. Both faced the death penalty. The 2 men were tried separately. Since neither would testify against the other, prosecutors used excerpts of their alleged confessions against them in court. Springsteen's lawyer argued this was unfair, as he couldn't cross-examine Scott. Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death in 2001. Michael Scott was convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life in prison. But the case did not end there. Years later, both convictions were overturned on constitutional grounds. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Springsteen's conviction based on an unfair trial in 2006. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to reinstate it. Scott's conviction was also overturned. The appellate court ruled their Sixth Amendment right to confront accusers was violated because their confessions were used against each other, but they were not allowed to be cross-examined in court. This was a devastating blow to the victims' families. As Eliza Thomas's mother said, "Their rights are violated. Our girls were murdered. It ruins your sense of fairness." Despite the overturned convictions, District Attorney Rosemary Limburg was determined to retry them. In preparation, her office ordered DNA tests on swabs taken from the victims at the time of the murders. They utilized a relatively new technology called YSTR testing, which searches specifically for male DNA. The YSTR testing successfully obtained a partial male DNA profile from one of the victims. What it revealed was shocking. The DNA did not match any of the 4 men originally accused, including Scott and Springsteen. This directly contradicted Springsteen's confession, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted one of the girls. As DNA expert C.C. Moore explained, YSTR DNA can eliminate almost everyone, and in this case, where it was found, if their YSTR does not match, they did not contribute that DNA. With the core evidence, the confessions, discredited by the overturned convictions, and the physical evidence, the DNA, excluding the defendants, the prosecution's case was severely weakened. District Attorney Limburg, while still confident Scott and Springsteen were responsible, stated she could not in good conscience allow the case to go to trial until the identity and involvement of the unknown male donor were determined. On October 28, 2009, after nearly 10 years behind bars, all charges were dismissed against Scott and Springsteen. They were released on bond in June 2009 and later freed entirely. They were not exonerated, leaving open the possibility of a retrial should new evidence emerge. The release of Scott and Springsteen brought the case back to its original chilling status, an unsolved quadruple homicide. The key question became, whose DNA was found at the scene? Officials continued trying to track down the source of the mystery DNA. In 2017, an Austin police investigator searched a public online DNA database. Unbelievably, he got a hit, a seemingly matching sample. Investigators were hopeful, believing they had finally found a break. But there was a problem. The matching sample in the public database had been submitted anonymously by the FBI. When Austin authorities contacted the FBI to get the name associated with the sample, the FBI refused, citing privacy laws. The FBI stated they had submitted the sample to test anonymous YSTR profiles for population frequencies, and the profiles were not suitable for matching to an individual. This created a nearly 3-year standoff between local investigators and the FBI. Frustrated officials and victims' families reached out to U.S. Congressman Michael McCall for help. McCall pressed the FBI. In early 2020, the FBI agreed to further testing on the YSTR DNA from the crime scene. The sample, initially having only 16 markers, not powerful enough for identification, potentially matching thousands or millions, was tested again, yielding an additional 9 markers for a total of 25. However, the results brought disappointment. The more advanced testing revealed that the sample from the crime scene no longer matched the FBI sample that had initially appeared as a hit. In a letter to Congressman McCall, the FBI stated the new results conclusively exclude the FBI sample donor, meaning it was not an investigative lead. As McCall said, and that was the greatest disappointment because we really thought we had it. The two customers seen acting furtively in the shop just before closing have never been identified. Maurice Pierce, one of the original suspects, died in 2010 after stabbing an Austin police officer during a traffic stop and foot pursuit. The officer survived. The case remains unsolved, but it continues to drive change. Motivated by the yogurt shop murders, President Joe Biden signed the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act into law in 2022, intended to ensure federal law enforcement reviews cold cases and applies the latest technologies. This law allows families to request federal agencies review their loved ones' cold cases. Investigators still have some of the limited YSTR DNA sample from the crime scene. They are waiting for DNA science to improve further before resubmitting it for testing. They believe this DNA is everything to solving the case. Over 30 years later, the mystery remains. The killer or killers of Amy Ayers, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, and Sarah Harbison have never been definitively identified or brought to justice. John Jones, the original lead investigator, still suffers from PTSD related to the gruesome scene. He keeps the green and white shirt he wore that night, the one he promised the families he wouldn't wear again until the case was solved. It still sits there. He and the victims' families still hope that one day the truth will be known and this haunting mystery can finally be put to bed.